Captain. Unidentified warp signature. Sector 7-1. The communications officer yelled out, breaking the calm of the station. All crews to stations. All hands on deck. Captain Terran yelled out, standing proud on the deck. Within minutes, every man and woman on board was at full alert, out of their quarters and away from the comfort of their cast-sarin crystal displays and at the cold steel and polymer that was their assigned station. Warp signature is growing. Detecting capital class ship. Approximate size at 1100 meters. 1100? That's a dreadnought. Shields to maximum power. Terran commanded. He was now definitely concerned. Border disputes were common, especially with the Serantis nearby, so this may very well be a raid. Serantis bastards might be hitting us with a surprise attack. Call for reinforcements. Warp signature is getting stronger. Bubble collapse in 3, 2, 1. Target sighted. The beast that appeared from that wormhole was not a Serantis warship. It was nothing like had ever been seen before. A massive beast the size of a small city, over a kilometer long, bristling with massive cannons. The armor plating was a dark gray in color, mixed with red and gold trimming and detailing. At its front sat a massive, terrifying effigy of some kind of creature's skull. The broadsides were covered in a strange emblem or marking. The emblem was a flag in black, gold, and red, with a 7-pointed star at the center of a large gear wheel. A black background, the gear wheel being of stitched gold and the star being of a very menacing scarlet red. We could very clearly make out that every inch of the ship's hull was covered in thousands of letters and symbols, clearly denoting a language. The closer it got, the less it scared us and the more it awed us. Every single part, piece, and component of this ship was handcrafted to a legendary quality. Thousands of small statues covered its surface, every armor plate covered in either a sort of holy seal or written text etched into the armor in gold or red. It approached the station where I stood on the bridge alongside the captain. It was at this point our communications failed. The radio chatter cut into dead silence, replaced by one of the most hauntingly beautiful voices I, or anyone, has ever heard. It was a language none of us could even begin to comprehend, but the voice that spoke it sent us into a delirium. Every radio, every screen, every communications array across the entire system now played this song. The sounds of multiple voices began to join the cacophony. A dozen voices singing in perfect unison with 2 speaking words, the others simply humming or maintaining a chord to carry the song. It was a song that filled all who heard it with an intense feeling of sadness, loss, and mourning, one that few of us had ever felt before. The ship slipped effortlessly through the maw of space, closing the gap and finally coming to a rest near the station. Its underbelly opened up, and out came another ship, a very badly damaged ship. The massive ornate beast moved away from the station, then pulled a turn that would have easily sheared any ship we had clean in half. It sat there in silent vigil as if waiting for the music to end. That haunting, beautiful sound continued for 7 minutes. On the plant's surface, thousands of men, women, children, even the normally stoic Admiralty were in tears. Soldiers in formation prepared for invasion were standing at attention at their posts, involuntarily giving a salute. Then the song changed. An increase in tempo and a change in tone suddenly had all who heard it filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Officers wiped the tears of sadness from their faces and replaced them with a sense of pride and tears of joy. Crying younglings in the streets now had smiles on their faces. An overwhelming sense of pride and accomplishment smashed into the populace like a tide of water and ice. The warships we asked for arrived but did nothing, coming close to the ship, scanning it or just looking at it, awestruck. As if a god had suddenly struck a chord in our souls and commanded us to shut up and listen. The song finally ended. Just as abruptly as it arrived, the ship sped off, then vanished into the darkness through a warp portal. All communications returned to full functionality. I moved closer to the viewing screen, wiping the tears from my face as I tried to regain my composure. It was then I noticed what it had left behind. By the gods! Is that the Poliaco? I exclaimed, finally noticing the badly damaged ship near the station. What? Captain Terran and several others got up from their stations and rushed to the viewing port. Indeed, it was the Poliaco, one of our exploration ships carrying the best and brightest of our species, lost to the empty void of space decades prior. Our first real exploration ship, a shattered hulk of scrap and twisted metal, covered in seals and mysterious emblems. The ship itself seemed unable to function. Such was the damage, so it appeared to have been secured by some kind of metal beam casing that probably stopped it disintegrating. We went into a frantic panic and swarmed the derelict. I rushed in, just behind a boarding team wearing pressure suits. We entered the ship's main cargo bay. The sight that greeted us broke us and sent us into despair. Coffins. 247 coffins, perfectly laid out in the cargo bay, bathed in a soft blue light from a series of ornate light posts that created artificial flames like candles. Each coffin had a viewing port on it, in which you could perfectly see the face of its occupant. Some members looked around and tried to open the devices, believing its occupants were still alive. I looked around and my eye caught the glint of silver in one of the boxes. I rushed towards it. The glint of silver belonged to an all-too-familiar necklace. I collapsed on the floor, reaching out for one last hug as I saw the face of my lost granddaughter. I began to sob uncontrollably and others rushed towards me to see if I was okay. I was not. Needless to say, it was a matter of severe shock as to what we encountered. It took us a few months to sort through and collate the data we acquired, mostly because we were busy burying the dead. The coffins were made of a polycarbonate substance similar in structure to an artificial wood substrate. Various toxic but otherwise inert fluids were used in the bodies to prevent or at least slow decomposition. The bodies were preserved and positioned in such a manner that it seemed as though the occupants were asleep instead of dead. We confirmed that it was somewhat jarring to find them in this state, but also calming. Once proper funeral services were conducted, questions began to fly. It was an insult to the dead to try get a sample of the fluid used for preservation, so scientists began to attempt to create their own using the minimal data we did have. Some families attempted to volunteer their relatives to the cause. We rejected every attempt and swore an oath to never let this act be wasted. We laid our greatest heroes to rest a month after the first encounter and got back to work. What was that ship? Scans collected from every ship that could scan it or any crew that could operate despite the circumstances showed us a few things. It was made of an extremely advanced alloy we couldn't dare replicate, showing highly advanced design that could completely ignore laser fire. Shield strength readings were 10 times what our flagship could output. It was producing energy readings that were absurd by any standards. A few of the gas giants in our home system couldn't produce that much energy. Weapon systems, from what little we could gather, would outclass every ship in the fleet 100 times over. Kinetic bombardment cannons, ballistic munitions cannons, beam weapons, point defense laser arrays, and we could, from photographs, determine the outline of launch bays for thousands of missiles and rockets. What was the language? The tech was on the outside beyond absurd. So, how did they gain access to our entire communications network? No trace of any signal was ever found. No means of entry was ever located. We have no idea how they seized our entire communication system, then used it to sing. What language was it? It wasn't much to work with, but our translation algorithms and software designated the language as Latin and began to translate the song. In the meantime, we started combing through the flight logs of the exploration ship. A simple accident involving a meteorite collision on exiting warp too close to an asteroid field. 24 crew members were left to die of starvation or exposure, while the rest died on impact or within a few minutes due to suffocation. I broke down in tears several times during the investigation on seeing recordings of my granddaughter with the crew. Finally, after a fair amount of time and several unfortunate breakdowns, the algorithm finished its translation. It is better to celebrate a life well lived and the impact it has had on those around it, than it is to mourn a life that has been lost. So long as you are remembered, so long as your footsteps are still where your path has led you, death is meaningless. Only those forgotten are truly dead. So long as you are remembered, so long as you were loved, you are immortal. So long as your impact is maintained, so long as the shadow of the tree you planted still remains, you are immortal. So long as you are loved, You had a greater impact on the universe than the death of 1,000 suns. In memory of the fallen, to those who came before and gave all they had to those who are now, we salute you. In memory of the fallen, to those who bled in wars long past, we salute you. Together to the future, we shall not let your sacrifice, however small, be wasted. Together to the void, we shall carry on in your footsteps and let your thunderous voices be heard. Together to eternity, raise a glass to those before and share your bread with those who are now. Together to victory, together to the void, us against eternity. We shall not falter. Rest in peace, for your work is done. Rest in peace, for it is our turn now. Rest in peace, for your greatness now shines through us. We are those you fought for, those you died for, those you lived for. We are the future. We shall not falter. Together to the future. Together to the void. Together for all eternity. Together. We are immortal. These simple words broke the empire. Literally broke us. In front of a delegation of our best warriors, one of our generals collapsed into tears. Our emperor confined himself to the temple for a week, refusing any food as a penance. Holy sites such as temples and graveyards suddenly became flooded with tens of thousands of people. Apologies and confessions of sins and crimes flooded the network, with former crime bosses and criminal gangs walking into police stations and locking themselves in prisons. Our entire society changed. All because of this one ship, this gesture, an act of kindness for the families of these lost and a mark of respect for the dead. Who? Why? As much as recent revelations changed us, we were still at war with an enemy 2 star systems away. We quickly got back into focus. Some weeks after this, however, that all came to an abrupt conclusion. I was up in the defense station, overseeing trade deals with some old allies when a mass alert rang out. It was a Scifi fleet. Hundreds of warships suddenly appeared at our borders. Then hundreds more. Then more than that. Then far too many. Even if we called up our entire reserve, not only would they not get here in time, there's no way in oblivion we would survive. We wouldn't go down without a fight. Damn them to oblivion, we would take as many of them with us as we could. Well, that's what we thought at least. Until that bastard flagship of theirs warped in behind them. The Planet Killer. The one that destroyed Kessern Prime at the start of the war. Thankfully it wasn't too heavily populated, but it was no less of a loss. The fleet assembled before us was too much. Whatever fight we had, it would wipe us out. They hailed us and the Emperor himself, Juhad Valhem, was on board the flagship. I demand your presence on board my flagship. Bring your Emperor to me now. To discuss terms of surrender, I'm guessing? I said flippantly, trying to stall for time. A laser beam shot out of the flagship's support fleet. That was a warning shot. I shall not ask again, he commanded. I relayed the message to my own Emperor Afahid VII. Within the hour he and I were on board a shuttle on the way to their emissary barge. The Emperor Juhad was sitting on his grandiose throne in front of us, an expression of rage on his face as we approached. Juhad, the red-skinned, and Afahid, the blue-skinned. We are a species of roughly similar features, with those of blue skin being slightly shorter but stronger, while our red-skinned foes have greater intellect but larger stature. Juhad, Afahid. We meet again. The two men regarded each other as we stood in the halls, the meeting broadcast for all to witness. A moment of tense and absolute silence. So much so the sneeze of a rodent could be heard 12 systems away. Emperor Juhad's expression changed as he broke the silence, dropping to his knees, prostrating himself before my emperor, and began to cry copious tears. "Please forgive us," he cried as his tears stained the ground. Afahid was now stood silent, his jaw agape at the sight of a generation's old enemy suddenly dropping to the floor in tears. A warrior king, reduced to a blubbering mess in front of his empire's subjects. Afahid and I looked at each other in confusion for a moment, before Juhad finally estipedi his blubbering long enough to eke out a coherent statement. "How many, brother? How many? How many lives have been wasted with this conflict? How many of our sons and daughters have we sent to their deaths? It was all for nothing. Nothing. It was all a lie, he yelled in between sobs. Ju had pressed a button and holographic screens appeared, laying bare evidence that nearly made me pass out. The first image laying out the displayed and carefully preserved remains. Among them, pictures of crew members carefully preserved in the same pristine coffins. The crew members all had a mixture of blue and red skin. And among them, a young mother holding a child with purple skin. Liars and traitors. Murderers and criminals, all of them. When we thought the ship's lost, we were told it was your doing. They fabricated everything and sent us into a mad, pointless war against our own kin. They have been smote from this universe with as much malice as I could muster. I come here to pay for my recklessness and sanity. My own daughter was among those ships. Juhad sat on his knees with his head bowed and presented his arms up as if he was ready for arrest. Forgive me. Ufhaid stood stunned for a moment, then reached down and grabbed one of Juhad's hands, pulling him to his feet and embracing him, both men in tears. You are forgiven, brother. Some months passed, and our mutual war had been all but forgotten. Reparations from both sides were forgotten simply out of the need to bring peace. A new chapter in our history began. But through all this, one question remained. Why? Juhad's own fleets were met with the same kind of ship we encountered on that fateful day. The same markings, scripts, and even the same haunting music. Only the one they encountered was much, much larger. It was on the anniversary of our first year as an alliance we got our answer. A communication tech from one of our security cruisers barged into the Grand Hall, causing a commotion, and evaded the guards to approach Emperor Juhad and Ufhaid. She was extremely agitated, but he had a curious smile on his face. What is the meaning of this? Juhad yelled, his temperance unchanged from his previous rule. I found it. I got a signal back, she yelled excitedly. Found what? The temperance launched a gathering of signal probes toward the ship that retrieved the Poliaco. One of them managed to attach itself somehow to the armor plating, and we got a signal back 20 minutes ago. She squealed excitedly. She quickly gathered her portable equipment and brought up a galaxy map, highlighting a particular point in a far-flung segment of the galaxy. The marker designated the system's name as Sol. The signal was a bit garbled, but eventually the technician, still keeping us on the edge of our seats, in my ASE literally, as she tried to recover something. Ah, I got it. The probe took a few pictures, she said excitedly. A button was pressed and the image that greeted us shattered our fragile hearts. There were thousands of those ships, each one in a varying state of destruction, disuse, or decay. Each one bearing a plaque, on which were written hundreds of names. On each ship, a metal plate was welded wherever it could. Each plate had the phrase, "Death is not that which must be feared. It is a companion that we must take in our stride. Gone but never forgotten, lest more be lost. Never forget." It was a graveyard, a massive, massive star system-sized graveyard. Our hearts sank as the probe performed a bioscan and found only silence. A closer look at the nearest ship revealed it to be almost entirely automated despite the damage it sustained. Our military commanders were now seriously worried and wondered what could have caused any damage at all to these ships as they murmured amongst themselves. We cycled through some of the pictures the probe took as more of them arrived through the data stream. Photos of larger swathes of the system showed countless derelict starships anchored in place around the entire star system by artificial gravity hooks. Derelicts of innumerable manufacture and quantity, not made by the locals but by countless other races. Thousands upon thousands of ships, ranging in size from fighters to multi-mile-long titans. Megastructures of any conceivable kind surrounded every planetary body. Refineries, military installations, Matryoshka brains, massive megastations, and what looked to be a stellar ignition unit lying shattered and broken around one of the gas giants. This entire star system appears to be a massive graveyard, but it looked far from dead. However, one thing that puzzled us was, where is everybody? All we could make out were automated drones and machines. No people, at least None that were alive. We cycled through more astonishing pictures, until I finally pointed and yelled, "There! Right there! See it?" Everyone looked carefully at my fingertip and spotted the clear sight of a bipedal creature in a thick mech-suit, welding a memorial plate to a ship's hull. "By the ancients." "I do," Juhad said. "What is it?" "2 arms, a head, 2 legs. Even in that mech-suit I can tell that much." "Do you have anything that shows it up close?" Afhaid asked the technician. "No, my lord, that's the last photo I have. We are still getting more. The next one will get here in about 2 minutes. Then it's another 8 for the data to collate and process. We are working as fast as we can," she replied, trying to keep calm. "In the meantime, Captain Terran, ready our ship and plot a course to that system." "I have an idea," I said out loud and excused myself from the table. "Wait, the last photo is ready. I have it here." Now, the final photograph loaded. We were startled out of our seats as the strange creature was now in front of the optical lens, staring straight into it. Its mouth was curved upwards in what was clearly a smile. Its eyes were a haunting, beautiful brown, but even with a cursory glance one could feel a heavy, saddened burden emanating from his expression. "That is what's there? Why?" Juhad spoke. "Why does it look like us? Only without the pointy ears and the pink skin?" Afhaid replied, finishing the statement. "Captain, ready our ship." The journey took us 6 months. Seoul was 147 jumps from home, but we were set for the long haul as Juhad gave us one of his heavy battleships, retrofitting it for an extended journey instead of me struggling with my old diplomatic frigate. I had with me on the bridge General Hakim and Admiral Gohan, along with Captains Terran and Soren. Alongside me was my fellow diplomat, Master Reagan. We were moments away from entering the system around the planetoid designated Pluto, and the atmosphere was palpable. "I don't like this. I don't like it one bit." General Hakim spoke above the din as he stood at the viewing port. "Neither do I." "What the hell are you doing with that?" Admiral Gohan asked and gestured to the bouquet of flowers I was holding. "Don't worry. I have a plan. Just let me do all the talking." The probe secured some data files and other things from the Poliaco. "I know what I'm doing." I smiled at them, though I will admit it did nothing to calm the atmosphere. Exiting hyperlane in 3, 2, 1. Entry. The ship's pilot yelled out, grabbing everyone's attention. The ship popped into existence just beyond the system's perimeter. Within moments of our appearance, we had 10 dreadnoughts appear and aim their cannons at us. The voice of a machine hijacked our communications and a holographic image of a machine-like eyeball appeared in front of us on the bridge. It tracked us. Clearly very advanced tech if they could project their holograms through our shields straight into our hulls. "You have entered a secured star system. Designate objective immediately. You have 5 minutes to comply." The machine spoke and it was clearly agitated. I spoke in response. "We are here to pay respects to the dead. One of our ships is recorded to be here. We wish to speak to the one in charge here to recover that ship and bring it home." I made sure to hold the flowers up so it could clearly see. "Processing request." A few tense moments passed. "Confirmed. Ship manifest and cargo match intentions. Gravekeeper has been notified. Please proceed along designated area. Maintain low speed to avoid incident." A series of bright holographic arrows appeared and our pilot took the initiative, moving us through the pathway. We looked around and took in the sights. Some of these ships were massive. We ran a basic scan while we could. One such ship was over 20 miles long and nearly 4 miles in height and width. Most of the megastructures and giant stations were intact and appeared fully functional, though a bioscan done still produced no life signs. Only machines. Millions upon millions of machines. A few minutes later, the Admiral pointed towards our destination. Retribution's Kiss? A ship Juhad lost a few decades ago. A ship full of heroes. "I knew it, I knew I saw that ship on the feed," I exclaimed as we got closer. For the sake of the read, the song I was listening to as I wrote This Is Beautiful Oblivion by Scott Buckley. It seemed to fit perfectly. Our comms suddenly cut and were replaced with music. Beautiful, somber, Sad music. We docked with the ship with a thud. The Retribution's kiss had its entire aft section destroyed. Several holes punctured through most of the rear superstructure, and a starboard thruster pod looked like it had been on fire. A somber mood overcame us all as I headed to the airlock. On entering, I was immediately greeted by the sight of more of those precious coffins, each one ornately decorated with its occupant appearing sound asleep. I approached fully aware I was no longer alone as the crew followed and placed the flowers I was carrying on one of the coffins. Everyone else followed suit, and soon the entire crew, save a few needed volunteers, had come out with their own bunch of flowers. We each stood with our heads bowed as we silently uttered a prayer for our fallen brethren. It was only now we noticed the figure standing in the room, its hands in front of it with its head low. We continued for a minute or so more, placing more flowers and allowing scholars to take notes of names for the dead. I motioned to the being at the opposite end of the room if we could pick them up and take them home. It simply nodded in agreement, and I called for us to quietly carry the coffins on board the battleship. I stood by and waited as each body was carried away. The music finally ended. I looked to my left, now noticing the creature standing next to me. It was a clear 2 feet shorter than I was. I could now clearly see more of its features, obscured as they were by the robe he wore. Definitely a male, 5 fingers instead of our 4. A small tuft of hair atop its head with more on its face, grown long and gray, instead of completely bald like us. Rounded, short ears instead of jagged edges like us. A simple lesson to learn, but one that has no lesser impact. Never forget lest we lose more. Never forget, lest they be gone forever. I waited a moment to respond, allowing my translation unit to work. You are the gravekeeper the machines told us about? Aye, that I be. The name is Grim, or at least I think it is. It's been a while since I needed to care. About 1,400 years to be exact. He said, looking up at me. Can you explain that? I asked, trying my best to be polite. Look, son, I know why you are here as much as I do, so let's not sugarcoat it. I've done this for far too long now, so I will cut to the chase. You are here only because you saw one of your own ships, but let's face MIT. You came here to do more than just recover bodies. He looked up at me with a certain degree of side-eye. Well, I sighed in defeat. Highly advanced tech, massive warships, uncountable technologies. You can't say you had an ulterior motive for being here, but at least I can appreciate the sincerity of your funeral service. At least you respect the dead. Now tell me, why are you really here? To thank you for bringing my granddaughter back home. To thank you for bringing that ship back. To thank you for giving me a chance to say goodbye. I smiled down at him, a tear forming in my eye. You are welcome. It's my job. And what's the other thing? To ask some questions. To see if we can negotiate a proper trade. To see if we could be friends. I said, holding my hand out. He looked at me and sighed. Friends it is. He shook my hand. So lad, I'll spare you the trouble of asking, and I'll just answer. My species abandoned the galaxy some 1,400 years ago because we were beset by enemies on all sides. Constant war with no friends, this pace became more a memorial than a home system because of how many losses we were taking. Eventually, we were left with few choices and simply just buggered off. I was one of very few volunteers to stay behind when everyone left. We found no friends here and simply just decided it wasn't worth sticking around. So we packed up and left. He explained as he led me to the edge of the room, overlooking a view of Earth. That is very depressing. I cannot imagine what it would be like to abandon one's home. I'm not completely alone, of course. Every now and then I get pilgrims coming from the other galaxy and they visit Earth. We built all this, you know. Probably have a lot more. Come to think of it, how long before you go home? He looked up at me with a peculiar smirk. Well, we have to refuel the ship and hold some vigils, but we should be returning home in a few days. Why? If you stick around for a week or so, you'll be able to catch a pilgrimage. I'm not the only human in the universe, but I am the only human here. If you are willing to be patient, you'll be able to conduct a proper first contact with the Federation. He said, his smile and expression now seemed to calm down. Oh, Actually, I would love that. I will go tell the commanders. I will arrange it all. Thank you again. No problem. Anything for a friend.